Believing that a person can simply vanish without a trace is the most dangerous illusion you can entertain. You comfort yourself with words like lost or missing, as if they are merely misplaced objects waiting to be found. But I have stared into the abyss that separates what is known from what is always watching. And I can tell you, some people do not get lost. They are taken. They are erased. The world you see is a thin, brittle crust over a chasm of endless night, and sometimes that crust cracks. A hand reaches through, a whisper calls a name, and a soul is pulled from the tapestry of existence, leaving behind not a hole but a thread that now leads elsewhere. It leaves behind an echo, a cold spot in the air that can only be felt by those of us who dare to listen. Tonight, we are not telling stories. We are unsealing 4 cold cases from a tomb of forgotten fears. These are not cautionary tales. They are echoes of the moments the mirror cracked, reflecting something that should not be. We will walk the final steps of those who were claimed by the shadow, and we will feel the chill that lingers where they once stood. We are descending into the very marrow of dread, to the places where the map ends and the darkness begins to breathe. I will show you what I have seen in my visions, the scent of dried blood on a path that leads to nowhere, the reflection in a shard of glass that shows a face not your own. Forget what you think you know about safety. The doors you lock are meaningless. The first echo begins with the mundane, as they always do, a journey home. A young man named Brandon Swanson, his spirit buoyed by the end of a college semester, navigating the familiar arteries of his homeland. But the veins of the earth are treacherous, especially at night. They twist and turn like sleeping serpents, and sometimes they lead to places that are not on any map. His car, a shell of steel and glass, betrayed him, sliding into a ditch, a simple inconvenience, a laughable misstep in the grand scheme of a young life. He was not afraid. He was annoyed. He called his parents, the voices of his anchor in the world, and began to walk toward what he thought was the light of a nearby town, toward safety. But the night has its own geography, a landscape of whispers and shifting landmarks. The lights he saw were not the lights of Marshall. The path he walked was not the one he knew. This is the first rule of the abyss. It wears the mask of the familiar. It mimics the world you trust to lure you deeper into its embrace. Brandon described fields and fences, the mundane scenery of his life. Yet the search parties would find nothing of the sort where his phone's signal last pulsed. He was walking through a landscape that existed only for him, a stage set by an unseen hand. His parents, desperate and cold on the other end of the line, were listening to the final broadcast from a world that was already fading away for their son. Listen carefully, because this is the moment the veil tears. 47 minutes into the call, a thread of connection to everything he had ever known. His voice is calm, and then it is not. A single sharp expletive cuts through the static. Oh shit. It is not a cry of pain. It is not a shout of surprise. It is the sound of pure, undiluted realization. It is the sound a soul makes when it finally sees the true face of the night. What did he see? It was not a wild animal. It was not another car. My visions show me a brief, terrible clarity. The landscape rippling like dark water. The stars rearranging themselves into unholy constellations. A silhouette standing where no man should be. He did not trip. He did not fall. He saw the hunter. And then, silence. The line went dead. Not just disconnected, but severed. A clean cut, as if a celestial cord had been snipped by shears of obsidian. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, filled with a terrible finality. It was the sound of a door slamming shut somewhere in the cosmos, locking a soul on the wrong side. His parents were left holding a dead phone, a cold piece of plastic that had been their last bridge to their son, a bridge that now led to a cliff's edge and an abyss of static. The search began, a frantic dance against the coming dawn, fueled by a hope that was already turning to cold ash in their hearts. They were looking for a boy who had walked off their map and onto another. The dogs, with their senses tied to the raw truths of the earth, were brought in. They are meant to be our guides, creatures who can follow a scent trail through chaos and confusion. They followed Brandon's path from his abandoned car, their noses pressed to the cold ground, tracing the ghost of his presence. They followed the scent for 3.5 miles, a clear, unbroken line of his life force imprinted on the land. And then, in the middle of an empty field, on the bank of the Yellow Medicine River, the trail did not fade. It did not scatter. It stopped, as if he had been lifted from the earth by an invisible hand, plucked from the world, like a pawn from a chessboard. One moment, he was there. The next, he was not. The river was searched, of course. Logic demands it. The mundane mind clings to explanations of water and gravity, of missteps in the dark. But the river was a red herring, a distraction offered by the darkness to appease the searchers. He was not in the water. The entity that took him did not need to drown him. It simply needed to remove him. The dogs were confused, circling the spot where the world had swallowed a man whole. Their whining was a testament to the unnatural, a mournful cry against a violation of the laws they implicitly understand. A man's scent does not simply vanish into the air, unless the air itself is the thing that takes him. The search parties, the helicopters, the hundreds of volunteers, they were all participants in a meaningless ritual. They were searching for a body in a world that no longer contained the soul it belonged to. They scoured every inch of that cold, indifferent Minnesota landscape, their flashlights cutting feeble swaths through a darkness that had already claimed its prize. They were looking for evidence, for closure, for a single broken branch or a dropped key that would anchor his disappearance to their reality. But the abyss is tidy. It leaves no fingerprints. It simply takes what it wants and smooths the earth behind it, leaving only a chilling, perfect void. Years have passed. The car has long been towed. The parents' voices have grown hoarse from calling his name, and the fields have been harvested and replanted many times over. But the cold spot remains. The echo of that final sharp curse word hangs in the air on quiet nights. Brandon Swanson was not a victim of the elements. He was a victim of geography. He took a wrong turn not on a road but in reality itself. He saw something he was not meant to see, and the price for that glimpse was his own existence. He is a ghost in the static, a whisper on a dead phone line, a permanent resident of the place where the map ends. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? The silence between heartbeats is where these truths reside. Now we travel from the lonely roads of the heartland to the manufactured cheer of a foreign resort. We cross the sea to a place where the sun is meant to wash away all shadows. Golden Sands, Bulgaria. This is where we find the next echo, the story of Lars Mittank, a young man, like so many others, seeking harmless fun, a brief escape from the predictable rhythm of his life. He was with friends, surrounded by the comforting illusion of camaraderie and safety. But a foreign land is a dangerous thing. The soil is different, the air carries different spirits, and the local gods are not your own. You are an outsider, spiritually unprotected, and vulnerable to whispers you do not understand. A trivial altercation, a common folly of youth and alcohol becomes the catalyst. A blow to the head, a ruptured eardrum. It was a physical injury, something for doctors and medicine. But every wound is also a doorway, a crack in the vessel of the self through which other things can enter. The injury to his ear was not just a medical issue. It was a tuning fork, suddenly allowing him to hear a frequency that is usually hidden beneath the noise of our world. His friends returned home, leaving him behind to heal, alone in a land whose secrets were beginning to seep into his wounded mind. The isolation was the perfect incubator for the fear that was to come. He checked into a hotel, a cheap and anonymous place, and it was there that the whispers began in earnest. He became paranoid, convinced he was being followed, that the men from the earlier fight were hunting him. He called his mother, his voice a thread of terror stretching across Europe. He whispered of 4 men who wanted to kill him, who would not let him leave. But were they men of flesh and blood, or were they something else, drawn to the psychic wound he now carried? He hid in his room, turning off the lights, barricading the door, a prisoner of a fear that no one else could see. The hotel became his tomb, the shadows in the corners of the room stretching into menacing shapes. The mundane world offered a solution: an airport, a doctor, a flight home. These are the rituals of our reality, the prescribed steps to return to safety. He went to the Varna airport, a place that is itself a threshold, a non-place between worlds. He saw a doctor to be cleared for travel. Inside that sterile, quiet room, the whispers must have become a roar. His paranoia reached a fever pitch. A construction worker entered the room, a simple man doing his job. But to Lars, in his heightened state, this was one of them. This was the hunter, finally revealed. The mask had slipped. His terror was no longer a creeping dread. It was a tidal wave of pure primal panic. And this is where everything changes for you. He did not scream. He did not fight. He fled. He burst from the doctor's office, a blur of motion captured on the cold, indifferent eye of a security camera. He ran through the airport terminal, a soul possessed by a terror we cannot comprehend. He left behind his wallet, his phone, his passport, all the symbols of his identity in our world. He was shedding his skin, divesting himself of the reality he knew. He was running from something only he could see, a predator that had cornered him in that small white room. The other travelers were merely obstacles, ghosts in the periphery of his desperate flight. He ran out of the terminal, out into the bright sunlight that offered no sanctuary. He sprinted across the tarmac, a place of order and control, and headed for the airport's perimeter fence. A fence topped with barbed wire, a barrier designed to keep the world out. For Lars, it was the final wall of his cage. With a strength born of ultimate fear, he scaled it. He cleared the barbed wire and dropped to the other side, into a dense forest bordering a sunflower field. And then, he was gone. He ran into the woods, swallowed by the trees, and vanished from the face of the earth. The security camera footage is the last testament to his existence, a silent film of a man escaping one reality for another. The forest was searched. Of course it was. Drones, dogs, teams of men. They combed the woods, the sunflower field, the surrounding area. They were looking for a lost man, perhaps injured, certainly disoriented. But they were operating under the wrong assumptions. They were looking for a man who was still playing by the rules of their world. Lars Mittank was no longer playing their game. The entity that had been whispering to him, that had cornered him in that airport office, had finally caught him in the deep woods. He was not lost in that forest. He was harvested from it. The forest was simply the doorway it used. What did he hear, with his ruptured eardrum, that drove him to such madness? He heard the truth. He heard the humming beneath the surface of things, the voices that ride on the edge of silence. The injury didn't make him crazy. It made him receptive. It opened a channel, and something ancient and hungry answered the call. The men he feared were real, but perhaps not in the way he thought. They were the faces the entity wore, projections to manipulate him, to herd him toward the designated exit point. The Varna airport became his personal labyrinth, and at its center was not a minotaur, but a silent, patient hunger that had been waiting for a wounded soul to wander in. The sunflower field stands as a silent, golden monument to his disappearance. Sunflowers, which turned to follow the light, watched a man run into eternal shadow. He is another ghost in the machine, a flicker on a CCTV screen, a name on a missing persons poster that has faded in the Bulgarian sun. He did not die in that forest. Death is an ending within our reality. He was taken to a place where death is a meaningless concept. He ran from a perceived threat into the waiting arms of a far greater and far more fundamental horror. A horror that wears the skin of the world and whispers promises of death to lure you into its embrace. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your presence here gives these echoes form, allowing them to be heard once more. We turn now from the land to the sea, to the great dark expanse of the ocean. The ocean is the primordial abyss, the womb of all life and the tomb of all secrets. It is a realm of crushing pressure and eternal night, a place man was never meant to conquer. We build our ships, our floating cities of light and steel, and pretend we are its masters. But these vessels are merely fragile eggshells skimming across the surface of a consciousness that is ancient, deep, and utterly alien. On one such eggshell, a cruise ship named Rhapsody of the Seas. The mirror cracked again. Amy Lynn Bradley was on a family vacation, a ritual of togetherness and manufactured joy. The ship was a self-contained world, a labyrinth of casinos, restaurants, and cabins, all designed to distract from the infinite, hungry darkness that surrounded them. In the early hours of the morning, as the ship sliced through the Caribbean waters between Aruba and Curaçao, Amy sat with her brother on their cabin's balcony. They watched the stars, spoke of small things, unaware that the ship was sailing into a blind spot in the world, a fold in the fabric of the sea, where things could be misplaced. This was the last time her brother would see her as he knew her, a final, peaceful moment before the void opened its mouth. Her father saw her shortly after, asleep on the balcony. He watched her for a moment, a daughter safe in the floating fortress the family had paid for. He went back inside, and in that sliver of time, in those few minutes of inattention, the abyss claimed her. When he returned, she was gone. The bed was empty, the balcony was empty, her cigarettes and lighter were there, her shoes were there, but Amy was not. The world had been edited. A person had been deleted from the scene, leaving behind only mundane props. There was no sign of a struggle, no sound, no cry for help. It was a perfect, silent, impossible extraction, as clean as a surgeon's cut. The ship's crew was alerted. A search was conducted, but it was a pantomime of concern. A cruise ship is a machine of commerce and illusion. It cannot afford to have the darkness leak in. They searched with a deliberate lack of urgency, treating it as a case of a guest wandering off, perhaps drunk, perhaps seeking a tryst. But her family knew better. They knew the cold dread that was settling in their hearts was the truth. The ship was a predator, a mechanical accomplice that was carrying them further and further away from the place where their daughter had been stolen, its engines churning the evidence into 1,000 miles of wake. The official theory is that she fell or jumped overboard. It is the logical, sanitized explanation that allows the world to keep spinning. But the ocean is vast, and the chances of a body being found are infinitesimal. It is the perfect crime, the perfect disposal. However, the whispers that followed her disappearance tell a different story. They speak not of an accident, but of a transaction. The days before she vanished, certain crew members, waiters, had paid her an unusual amount of attention. They had asked to take her to a specific bar in port, a place with a reputation. It was not romantic interest, it was assessment. They were cataloging the merchandise. And then come the sightings, the ghostly echoes of her presence in our world. 2 Canadian tourists saw a woman matching Amy's description on a beach in Curaçao. They saw the tattoos that marked her as unique, a Tasmanian devil, a sun, a lizard. She was flanked by 2 men, and when they made eye contact, a look of desperate, pleading terror crossed her face before she was led away. A fleeting glimpse through the cracked mirror, a vision of a soul trapped on the other side. She was no longer a tourist. She had become property. She had been sold into a world that operates in the shadows that cling to the sunny shores of paradise. Another sighting, years later, a member of the U.S. Navy, visiting a brothel, a place where souls are currency. He saw a woman who introduced herself as Amy, who begged him for help, telling him she was not allowed to leave. Before he could act, she was taken away by her handlers. He was too late. He reported it, but the trail went cold, as these trails always do. She was a ghost, a whisper in a house of sin, a prisoner in a dimension of exploitation that exists parallel to our own. These are not just sightings of a missing person. They are proof that she was taken, not lost. That she was harvested from that ship for a market that trades in human life. The most disturbing evidence is a photograph, a picture circulated online, of a woman who bears an uncanny resemblance to Amy, reclining on a bed in her underwear, her face a mask of weary resignation. It is a portrait of a soul that has been broken, a life that has been stolen and repurposed. Her family believes it is her. It is a message from the abyss, a postcard from hell, a trophy of its conquest. It is proof that Amy Lynn Bradley did not fall into the water. She fell through a crack in the world, into a dark network that operates with impunity on the edges of our own. She became a commodity, her life a story told only in whispers in sordid back rooms. That cruise ship was not just a vessel, it was a hunting ground. A self-contained ecosystem where predators could move among the prey, disguised as staff, wearing smiles and carrying trays. They identified their target, isolated her, and in the dead of night, they plucked her from her life with terrifying efficiency. The ocean was not the cause of her demise. It was the perfect accomplice, its vastness, a shroud to cover the crime. She is out there still, a slave to shadows, her face appearing for a fleeting moment in a crowd, in a photograph, a desperate ghost trying to find her way back to a world that has already forgotten her, content with the simple lie that she simply fell. We arrive now at the final echo, and perhaps the most chilling of all, for it strikes at the heart of our most sacred space, the home. We are taught that home is a sanctuary, a fortress against the darkness of the world. But sometimes, the darkness is not outside. Sometimes it is invited in. Sometimes, the fortress is built on a fault line, and the foundations are rotten from the start. We journey to Fayetteville, West Virginia, on a cold Christmas Eve in 1945. The war was over, and the world was trying to heal, to believe in peace and safety again. But in the home of the Sodder family, a different kind of war was about to begin. The Sodder family was large, vibrant, and full of life. George and Jenny, and their 9 children. That night, a fire began, not with the flicker of an accident, but with a sudden, violent eruption. It was a hungry, intelligent fire, a conflagration that seemed to have a will of its own. George and Jenny escaped with 4 of their children, but 5 remained trapped upstairs. The house became an inferno with unnatural speed, the flames a roaring, orange mouth consuming everything in its path. The house was not just burning, it was being purged. It was a ritual of fire and destruction, and the 5 children were the intended sacrifice. Panic and chaos ensued. George tried to save his children. He ran for his ladder, the one he always kept leaning against the house, but it was gone. It had been moved to the bottom of an embankment, 75 feet away. The phone line was dead, cut. One of the older sons ran to a neighbor to call the fire department, but the operator did not respond. Every avenue of rescue, every thread of hope, was being systematically and deliberately severed. The trucks, which were only 2 miles away, took 7 hours to arrive. By the time they did, the Sodder home was nothing but a smoking pit of cold ashes. The house, and the 5 children within it, had been reduced to nothing. But the truth is, the fire was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the mystery. For when the ashes cooled and the heartbreaking search for remains began, they found nothing. Not a single bone fragment. Not a tooth. Not a trace of the 5 children who were supposedly consumed by the blaze. A house fire, even an intensely hot one, will almost always leave skeletal remains. But here, there was only a void. The official explanation was that the fire had been so hot, it had completely cremated the bodies. But this explanation felt hollow, a convenient lie to close a case that was already reeking of the impossible. Jenny Sodder never believed it. She began her own quiet rituals. She conducted experiments, burning animal bones in a hot fire to see if they would be destroyed. They were not. They were charred, but they remained. Her grief was not just the grief of a mother who had lost her children. It was the cold, gnawing certainty of a woman who knew she had been lied to. She knew her children had not been burned in that fire. They had been taken. The fire was not the weapon. It was the cover. It was a grand, theatrical distraction designed to erase all evidence of the true crime. A kidnapping orchestrated with diabolical precision. And the strange omens, the whispers from beyond, began to accumulate. A bus driver claimed to have seen the children peering at him from a passing car while the fire was still raging. A woman at a tourist stop saw them in Florida, in the company of 2 men and 2 women of Italian extraction. These were not just idle sightings. They were glimpses into the new reality the children had been forced into. They had been stolen, abducted for reasons that remained shrouded in shadow. George Sodder's outspoken criticism of Mussolini, his Italian heritage, these were whispers of a motive, a darkness that had crossed the ocean to claim its price in Fayetteville. The Sodders erected a billboard, a heartbreaking monument to their lost children, offering a reward for any information. It stood for decades, a silent testament to a parent's undying hope and a community's dark secret. And then, 20 years after the fire, a letter arrived, postmarked from Kentucky, addressed to Jenny. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid-20s. On the back, a cryptic, handwritten note. The man in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to her son Louis, who would have been that age. It was a message from the other side, a cruel and tantalizing glimpse of a life that had continued, somewhere else, under someone else's control. The man in the photograph was never identified. The trail went cold, another thread leading to a wall of silence. The Sodders lived out their lives under the shadow of that night, haunted by the faces of the children who had been stolen from their beds. The fire was a portal, a gateway created by human hands, but open to a darkness far older. The children were not killed. They were transferred. Their lives were stolen and repurposed, their identities erased, their futures rewritten by a faceless evil. The empty grave where their home once stood is not a memorial to a tragedy. It is a monument to a perfect crime, a testament to the chilling truth that not even the walls of your own home can protect you from the hands that reach out from the dark. These 4 stories are not separate incidents. They are variations on a single terrifying theme. They are proof that the world you inhabit is not as solid as you believe. Brandon Swanson walked off the edge of the map. Lars Mittank was hunted by a predator only he could see. Amy Lynn Bradley was sold in a market that operates on the dark side of paradise. The Sodder children were consumed not by a fire but by a conspiracy that used flames as its cloak. Each one represents a different kind of doorway, a unique tear in the veil, a lonely road, a foreign airport, a ship at sea, a house in the night. They are all thresholds. They are all places where you are vulnerable. What connects them is the silence that follows, the perfect, chilling absence of answers. Our world demands logic, evidence, and closure, but the abyss offers none of these things. It offers only a void, a question mark, that hangs forever in the air. The disappearances are not unsolved mysteries. They are answered prayers to a dark god. They are successful transactions. The victims are not missing. They are simply elsewhere. They have been moved to a different column on the great ledger of souls, and our world is poorer for their absence. We are left with only the cold draft that blows through the holes they left behind. Think about the fragility of your own existence. The thinnest of lines separates your reality from one of utter, incomprehensible horror. You walk on a floor of glass over a bottomless pit, and you have been taught your entire life not to look down. But the cracks are spreading. The sound of that glass breaking is getting louder for those who have the ears to hear it. These stories are the sound. They are the echoes of the moments when someone fell through. They are warnings, etched in dried blood and cold ashes, that your world is a borrowed space, a temporary illusion of safety in an eternity of shadows. The hunters are patient. They do not always use claws and teeth. Sometimes they use a stalled car on a dark road. Sometimes they use a minor injury in a foreign land. Sometimes they wear the uniform of a cruise ship waiter, and sometimes they use the all-consuming roar of a fire to cover their tracks. They are masters of camouflage, wearing the skin of the mundane world. They are the reason for the chill you feel on a summer's day, the flicker of movement in your peripheral vision, the sudden, baseless paranoia that grips you when you are alone. It is not your imagination. It is your soul's memory of the hunt. So what are you to do? There are no easy answers, no simple charms to ward off this kind of darkness. To be alive is to be at risk. But you can be aware. You can learn to recognize the thresholds. You can learn to trust the primal fear that whispers to you when a situation feels wrong. When a person's eyes are empty, when the silence is too loud, do not dismiss it as anxiety. It is your oldest and truest sense, the one that can smell the scent of the abyss. It is the voice of your ancestors screaming a warning from across the veil. Listen to it. Honor it. It is the only compass you have in a world where the maps are lies. The faces of the lost will haunt you now. Brandon, Lars, Amy, the Sodder children. Their names are keys, unlocking a room in your mind where a new kind of fear will now reside. Do not try to lock it away. Let it stay. Let it sharpen your senses. Let it remind you that every step you take is on ground that could give way at any moment. Let it be a constant reminder of the price of inattention. The world is a cracked mirror, and every day more and more of us are seeing the things that writhe and crawl on the other side of the glass. The question is not if the mirror will break, but when. I leave you with this final vision, a vast dark library, where every book is the life of a person. Most books are read from beginning to end, and placed neatly on a shelf. But some books have pages torn out. Some are snatched from the shelves by unseen hands, and taken to a different, darker wing of the library, where they are rewritten, their endings changed to something monstrous and eternal. These are the ones who have vanished. They are not gone. Their stories are simply being finished by another author, an author who thrives on fear, and whose ink is made of tears and shadows. Walk carefully. The world you think you know is a fragile reflection, a thin layer of ice over a deep, cold ocean. The shadows are growing longer, and the whispers are becoming clearer. Do not seek the darkness, but know that it is seeking you. It is watching you through the keyholes of your doors and the cracks in your mirrors. It is waiting for you to take that one wrong step, to listen to that one sweet whisper, to find yourself alone on a road that leads to nowhere you have ever known. The night is not empty. It is just very, very patient, and it is always, always hungry.